So hi, my name is Patricia Garza. I'm the Artistic Development Program Manager here at Center Theatre Group. Welcome, welcome. So nice to see friendly faces, I know. So I also am on the core team of Block Party here at Center Theatre Group, and we will be having our Block Party kickoff event this evening. So you are all invited to just mosey downstairs. You don't have to travel, and we're going to have cocktails and food and games and music, and you get to hear all about the new shows for the season, which is a little bit of background of how we came about to do this event. So we were sitting around talking about the kickoff and really brainstorming what that would look like. And we really wanted to have a moment to honor LA theater and to talk about the big topics at hand together as a community. And so I picked up the phone with my colleague Ian, who checked you in today, and we called Stephen from LA Stage Alliance. And we really thought it would be a lovely partnership to host a conversation around the paper that you all got in check-in today, Sustaining Los Angeles Theater, where all these folks were a part of that conversation in some capacity. And so thank you so much for being on the panel today. And thanks to the Omniscient Foundation for funding that program, which is fantastic. We will be live streaming this, so you can say hello to your friends and family. I think some people are already logged on. So that just means that everybody who talks today, we do ask that you wait until you talk to get a mic, so then that way it can be caught on live stream. We also will have it up on Center Theatre Group's Facebook page if you, for whatever reason, want to send it out to some folks, or you want to watch it again. Being live wasn't enough. So we will post that after the event is over. And I just wanted to say this is a community conversation. So this is a time for all of us to hear from everybody in the room. So how this will work is Stephen will pose a couple questions to our panelists. They'll riff for a little bit, but we will have some time where everybody can talk, and I will be running around with the mic, like I said earlier. And again, I just really want to thank you all so much for being here at 5 o'clock in the middle of the week. This is amazing. So I want to go ahead and introduce the panelists. I'm going to use the piece of paper so I do not mess it up. And I'll just go down the line here. So my colleague and friend, Lindsay Alba, one of our associate producers here at Center Theatre Group. Michael Shepard, co-artistic director of Celebration Theater. Thank you for being here. Danny Feldman, producing artistic director at Pasadena Playhouse. Sneha Desai, artistic director of EastWest Players. Laura Zucker, just two titles I'm going to say. Senior associate at AA Consulting and the former executive director at Los Angeles County Arts Commission. Jose Luis, our artistic director at Latino Theater Company, operating the Los Angeles Theater Center. And of course, our moderator, Stephen Lee Morris, executive director of LA Stage Alliance. So thank you again, and Stephen, I'll pass the mic to you now.
Thank you, Patricia, and welcome. I should say good evening, good afternoon. We're right on the cusp here. This panel was actually inspired by the work on the Sustaining Los Angeles Theater initiative that was it was initiated by the Amundsen Foundation, and we, LA Stage Alliance and NPO Solutions worked together for phase one of this initiative, and it's a 3-phase initiative. And it consisted, the ballpark, the idea was we wanted to gather organizations, mostly theaters it turned out, of all kinds of shapes and sizes and missions and models, and so we could address what are the challenges, why are we suffering, and how are we suffering, and what can we do about it so we can stop some of that suffering. And I think that's about the most concise way of putting it. There were 12 organizations represented in phase one, which is now complete, and we're bridging into phase two. Phase one, which is pretty much reported on in this. I keep saying I wrote it, but I haven't actually read it. So if some of the details, maybe you can fill me in on. We gathered for 4 roundtables and 2 webinars to have a vigorous discussion on how we wanted to test the hypothesis that collaboration can lead to sustainability. Some parties objected even to that thesis. That's how we started. And then we couldn't really come up at the early days on what a definition of sustainability was. Some people saw it through a financial prism. Other people saw it more in the ability to be nimble and simply survive. And so by the end, we came to an agreement, which was amazing. In Los Angeles, to agree on anything, or even, frankly, in this culture, to agree on anything, is sort of amazing. And we agreed that sustainability was probably best defined as somehow supporting the health of the sector, whatever that means. And there's all kinds of flexibility within that definition to account for upstart theaters that are just coming of age, as well as veteran theaters that have been around for decades and want to continue being around for another few decades. There were 14 models arrived at. Those are in the paper. We settled after 4 weeks on 4 that generated the most interest among those 12 organizations. Those were, one was a youth theater, a youth ticketing program, which is already a model in Seattle. It's called Teen Tix. And essentially, it's a way for arts organizations, not just theaters, but arts organizations, to allocate theaters that haven't sold on the day of to teenagers with a flex pass. That was one model. Jose Luis came up with the idea that he has seen in Latin America, Central and South America, called a spectator school, where there is not really a culture of theater per se, as there are on for instance, our Eastern Seaboard. And so it's a program where you train audiences how to appreciate the theater that's going on in their own backyard. And that has been extremely successful in cities there. And Jose Luis can talk more about that. We also came up with the idea of a citywide festival. We have a couple of festivals that are within one theater's walls, such as Encuentro at LATC. There's also the Hollywood Fringe, which is within, we'll say, a square mile. But the idea, we haven't seen a citywide festival since the mid-1990s, where it was all around the city, and it created a focal point for theater from people from the west side to East LA and the San Gabriel Valley in Orange County, and where the idea of and the importance of theater could be seen and celebrated. So that was an idea that generated excitement. And then there was the idea, pretty much a variation on Block Party here, and that's what are possible models for mid-sized theaters to create residencies, either for other mid-sized theaters or for smaller theaters. And I'm sure Lindsay will be happy to address that. So that's what we're up to. We are going into phase 2, which will be funded by NSI, which is a nonprofit sustainability initiative, which is a division of California Community Foundation. Those applications are not ready, but they will be soon. We have announced meet and greets for people to pursue whichever of these 4 models interests them the most, and they can apply. Theaters and organizations can apply in partnership. It doesn't have to be just one theater. Those meet and greets, as of this afternoon, the dates have changed by, we'll say, by popular demand. We didn't give people enough time. Oh, the first one was going to be on this coming Monday, and people said, what are you guys doing, really? So we're going to push those back into April, and we'll announce those tomorrow. So everyone should have an opportunity to gather at our beautiful offices in Atwater Village and discuss the possibilities of how this program can move forward. And with that, that was my overview. With that, I would just like to ask the panel, this feels like, I don't know if this is a panel or a firing line. It's like straight down. I'm gonna ask you to speak for 2.5 minutes. In your view, now having been through this program, what are the greatest challenges? That's 2.5 minutes. That's probably going to get really depressing, just to tell you ahead of time. But we're going to follow up with, and what do you see as the greatest potential for fulfilling those challenges? And that'll be another 2.5 minutes for each speaker. So shall we go? Well, let's start with that. I can't even see who's on the end. It's Lindsay. Okay.
Well, you know, I wasn't a part of the conversations that you guys were part of. I came and did a panel about Block Party. So I'll just sort of address some of the challenges for CTG and being part of the LA theater community and what we see. Obviously, we've all know that the LA city is wide and traffic and traveling and all of that, and sometimes we have felt that it can get a little insular. Like, you can be so involved in your own company and what you're doing that you forget about what your colleagues are doing, and how do you reach out and create meaningful partnerships when you're so bogged down with everything that you have to do with your own company. So that was something that we talked about when creating Block Party. And we can get to I know that's the second half of your question, but this idea of how to connect with each other and really share resources and ideas and artistic and business models. And then, that would help us champion and sort of put the megaphone to the fact that LA is an excellent theater town. I don't know, that wasn't 2.5 minutes, but that's where I'm going to start.
You can yield your time to Michael.
I yield, yes.
I'd like to yield my time to Danny Feldman, please. Hi, my name is Michael Shepard, and I am the co-artistic director of Celebration Theater. And if you don't know Celebration Theater, it is the oldest continuously producing lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, two-spirited, allied, asexual, cisgendered, non-binary theater in the country. And thank you. And saying all of that, one of the problems we have is actually bringing all of those communities together to experience theater and reaching out to those communities. Luckily, we have a base of folk who volunteer their time to be a company member at Celebration, who are a part of every one of those communities. So we are able to actually go out into those communities and have discussions and conversations to make sure that those people are coming in to see the shows that we do. Now, that being said, getting other people who may not identify with the 100 things that I said to also come in, because we have our community, because we're located in Hollywood, next to West Hollywood, we have our community base. We have our folks who are coming to the theater to see our works, but it is trying to find monies to have more advertising on the West Side, in Culver City, and all these places, and trying to find that and keeping new audiences coming in. And so that's a big problem for us, to make sure that we stay out in the public's eye, which is one of the reasons I'm very excited that we are a part of Block Party this year, because we get to attract an entirely different audience to the works that we do at Celebration. Now, one of the things, though, that I'm very proud of is our work that we're starting within the LGBTQ, et cetera, youth organizations, and in creating partnerships with queer and gay youth centers, and bringing those kids into see our shows, having funders coming in and to donate, to give us money so that these children can actually come and experience theater and see models of themselves on stage. So we're very excited about that happening. And I give the rest of my time to Danny Feldman. I know, it's like, we should be like singing like in harmony right now.
You don't want to hear that? I've heard you sing. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Oh my gosh, I adore you.
From the Pasadena Playhouse, which this year is turning 100 years old, and we're doing a lot of reflecting back. In 1917, 1918, there were no other theaters in this whole region, and there were frankly not a lot of other entertainment options. And I think that's really, the way I see it, the core to a lot of our sustainability issues in LA theater, that we are very insular, as Lindsay said, about the theater community, and if you're in this room, you are, I'm assuming, among that community, I hope. But we look at it a different way than I think the general culture around us is looking at it. The barriers we put in between theater and performing arts and dance and this, people, our patrons and our communities that are engaging with us, that we're serving through the missions of our organizations, it's a saturated market. It's a market that are looking for things to do, and their options are plentiful, including staying at home. And having an enjoyable experience. And as the quality and options rise in all of the sectors around us, it makes it harder to pierce through that. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges as a sector. I think that we are now in a self-curating society, and by nature our cultural institutions are curated. not by the patrons, but by artistic directors and staff and artistic staff. And I think that that mode is not natural anymore in our culture. And you see that everywhere. You see that, I don't have to give examples, you all experience that on a day-to-day basis. And how have our cultural institutions caught up with that? Where's the gaps? How are we seen? How are we speaking to our communities, having authentic relationships with them? And I think this goes to the hopeful part, which is the next part, not the first question. But I think we do have the opportunity in that we are live arts and we are gathering people in a community, in a room to sit together and have an experience. And some of our competitors or other peers don't have that. And we have that. And I don't know if we've all figured out yet how to maximize that and tell that story.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Snehal Desai, and I'm with EastWest Players, and we are the longest-running theater of color in the country and the largest producer of Asian American artistic works. And I was just on a different panel recently, and one of the things, I don't have the actual data, but I have a feeling if we actually looked at it, more people are probably going or seeing theater in Los Angeles now than ever before. So I have a feeling if we look at the numbers of who's, just the sheer quantity, probably more people are seeing theater more than ever. What is changing is the frequency, right? So one of the biggest aspects is how often people frequent any institution or how often they frequent an art form, because there is so much. And so I think that's a question to think about, because that's tied to things like subscription models and how much you produce and what you produce and things like that. But I think it's not so dire in terms of people aren't coming to the art form or wanting the experience. It's how often that they're engaging with it. And I think then what that means is if there's less frequency, then there's more of a need of quality, of a quality of experience. And that's also what the challenge of how much they're putting out to join you at the theater, right? So how much does it cost? It's more than just the ticket. It's the time, it's the drive, it's the babysitter, it's the parking, it's the meal before. So, and that makes it hard to take a risk on something in some ways. So I think it's looking at what the experience is and the frequency of it. And then I think there's two other things tied to what Danny was saying. One is the saturation thing. I think mission clarity is something that's important to look at. And what is the niche or the community that your work or company is serving? And that the time of these kind of generalities or general companies trying to just appeal to the masses, those are the companies that are most struggling, right? Because they're not speaking to a specific population. And I think that's the other thing to think about. And tied to that, I've never actually said this, but I'm interested in a question of, I do think serious art can happen in LA. I think it does. And it happens very much when you look at the LA Phil right now, right? The LA Phil nationally and internationally is renowned and has lifted the music, the way music is viewed in LA. And then the same with the art scene. For some reason, though, theater feels like the stepchild, and I think it's because we're in the shadow of this industry, and we often offer a lot of flexibility to our artists to say, yes, you can go to TV and film if you get more paying work and all of this kind of stuff. And I think we have to stay, if you're a serious artist, you have to stay committed to what you're doing, and we will also compensate you in a way that you will be able to pursue this art form seriously. More and more, I think there are planes full of artists moving here from New York and other cities and finding a home. And I think, how can we give them a life in the theater is a larger question to engage with. But I think we should also not diminish or dismiss the work we do and the seriousness of that work and engagement. So I think those are all some of the things that I'm thinking about. And then the other just thing is money. Sorry. And I yield to Laura.
I think I'd rather go mop up, because everybody else represents a specific theater company except me. So maybe you go first?
I was trying to be last so I can yield all the time. I'm Jose Luis Valenzuela. I'm the artistic director of the Latino Theater Company and the LATC. I'm not going to talk about my theater because none of you know who we are, so it's okay. And it doesn't matter. But I think what's so important here, I want to talk about the LA Theater. And this is a thing that I've been talking to Steven for for years now, I think. And a lot of it, when he was just a critic, I was blaming him. One of the problems of the city, as a critic, this wasn't a critic, that meeting that I had with the critic, and it's our problem of narrative as the LA Theater. We had not created a narrative for the LA Theater. We only live to the narrative of New York or Chicago or anybody else. But we, as the LA Theater, we have not created a narrative. And also because we haven't accepted our city as a city of diversity. And I think that's really important, because I believe all of you do amazing work. All of you do something special. And that narrative has not created for the world and for the country. So the idea is, oh, people don't do theater in LA, and if they do, it's really bad. So you only go, the families should go see it, but it's not theater, you know, it's not real theater. And we had let it happen for the last 50 years, you know? So to me, that's a major problem for all of us, not only for my theater company, but for us. It's as a city, it's a fantastic city, an amazing artist in this city, a group of people who love the theater and who does it, and we had allowed the outsiders or whoever they are to never allow us to create our narrative. That's really one of the big issues in the city for me.
So how do you create the narrative? How do you get the funding to fund the narrative? How do you seize control of your own future? How do you break through the clutter? The ideas, the 4 ideas that have emerged through this process are really incredibly strong, I think, and powerful. But since there's only 5 minutes and counting down now, I'm going to focus on one, which is the Arts Festival one. Who here remembers 1984 Olympic Arts Festival? Seminal, turning moment, changed our idea of what LA and what we all could do together could be. We have the Olympics coming up in 2028. We have some tentpoles leading up to the Olympics: Tokyo in 2020, Beijing in 2022, Paris in 2024. We don't know who in 2026 that can ramp up to something amazing. No other city has ever had a 10-year lead time to a cultural Olympiad. What a fantastic opportunity to invent something amazing and new. But we have had in our midst, after the Olympic Arts Festival, we know the Los Angeles festivals and then the petering out of the Los Angeles festivals. We have had amazing festivals right here within the past decade with Pacific Standard Time, the example of what could be done to change the narrative for all visual arts organizations in LA, both internally to generate excitement about people going to things and places they've never been to, and creating a validation nationally and internationally. And yes, this took the vision of the Getty, and it took funding from the Getty to make that happen. But it's not really that big amount, guys. It's $14 to $16 million for each Pacific Standard Time, because each of the organizations that participates in Pacific Standard Time puts in their own amazing resources to make it happen. It's the organizing principle that drives it forward. It's the organization that says you're either on the bus or off the bus. So there is incredible opportunity here. You know, there was a performing arts kind of little part of the last Pacific Standard Time that just happened, but it was small and it was led by one organization. But where is it written? It couldn't be large for the next one and have large participation with additional resources and partners that are brought to the table. So I see nothing here but amazing opportunities.
Shall we continue with the potential to fulfill our potential? I think you segue. You get points off for not addressing what was so miserable about LA. So, so we'll continue. We'll take your momentum and go from there. Jose, let's go down the other way.
Well, I mean, in these discussions, as you know, I've been doing these encuentros, first national, and then we did of the Americas in 2020 as a global encuentro. That means to bring everything. And when we're having this conversation, some of the funders, most of my funder comes from New York or from the East Coast. And it's a problem that we need a whole other panel just to talk about that. There is no funding in LA for anything. And that's something that we have to figure out. So a lot of the funding that I've been talking to for the 2020 is talking about the importance of doing a city or county-wide festival. If I do the global festival, they're much more interested in creating a festival that would be county-wide or city-wide, which I think is a lot more exciting. You know, and the perception of who we are. And again, this comes back to the narrative, to me, because the idea that this is the most multicultural city in the world, you know, to have a multicultural festival with people from around the globe in our own communities, with our own companies and the diversity of it, it's very exciting. You know what I mean? And it begins, and also because my feeling is the audience have changed a lot. The audience have changed a lot. I mean, at least in my theater, my audience are from 18 to 45. They're very diverse. They don't have so much money, but they like to come to the theater. So I feel like that's the new audience in LA, that is more diverse and economically less affluent, but that's the areas that we need to educate for 2028. This is my point. I think only by a process of, you know, like inviting to the meet and greet, and then we go to a dinner, and later on we go to the dance, and then we can get married. But but the idea of how to, I mean, this is a long-term idea, changing the narrative. It cannot be done in one year or two. But if we think we're in 2018 and we're talking about a 10-year 2028, and who are the greatest, you know, who are these artists in LA who have the great partnership, will, potential to begin a process of engaging with the globe and creating a theater in Los Angeles, you know, that belongs to all of us. I think that is very exciting for me. And that was one of the proposals. How do we begin that process?
Unless, Laura, you have something to add or?
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I mean, look at this room. I think the community itself is the strongest aspect and asset that we have. I think, look at who's here engaged in this dialogue at whatever day it is, at 5. You know what I mean? And how much we care about that. And I think that's where the heart and soul of it is, and that's really amazing. And I think now it's a dialogue with funders and other folks to help us create work. I think we also live in an amazing city that is pushing the dialogue nationally, and I hope we can create work that will also do that and want to get sued by the federal government because it's speaking some sort of truth. So I think that's what we should be doing. And then the other thing that is harking back to what Jose Luis was saying, was just to spin it the other way. How exciting that we have this opportunity to create a narrative, because that's what we do. We're theater makers, we're storytellers. Crafting narrative is what we live by. And so to have that opportunity is something that shouldn't be a negative, but that we should want to embrace and take charge of and engage with.
I really responded to and fully agree with Laura in that I'm from Los Angeles. I was born and raised here. There are not a lot of us. And spent some time recently in New York and then back here. And I don't think our city, the city, you know, my city, our city that I love, has ever been better positioned for where we are right now. It's all upside. There are some very real challenges, but there isn't a narrative. We aren't defined yet. We now are in the position and have the opportunity to take off. And we've seen it in the other arts, as Snail was saying. We've seen it with Pacific Standard Time and how that galvanized and really reshaped the even global community's view of the art scene in Los Angeles. And it happened really quickly. It happened amazingly quickly. So there's a huge opportunity that there's lessons to be learned from that. LA Phil, music scene, same way. And there's a lot of upside, a lot of opportunity for theater to catch up on that. Because again, in the convoluted world, we still have the thing that theater has always had, which is connecting to people, getting people together, and this city craves that. It's sort of the antithesis of what the city is. We're spread out, and how do we create that? So it's why I'm here. I am more optimistic than ever that we're taking the long view and we have the opportunity, or we have the upper hand. And this panel, this part of our conversations of this, the phase of the process was about how to start galvanizing and be really tactical about it. So yes, I'm optimistic. Lots of upside.
Creating the narrative. So I work with a lot of universities and with a lot of theater departments because they're always looking for a more diverse voice coming in and talking to their students who are primarily Eurocentric. And so what I'm noticing is that their instructors are telling them, you know what, don't go to New York. For a true theater experience, you might want to start off in LA. It's no longer Chicago, it's no longer New York, it's LA. Because per capita, we have more theater here. We have more theater experiences here. And I'm watching these kids come in and they connect with me once they get here, and they're so excited. So in terms of creating and building this narrative, it's already happening. And as Denny said, now is a time for us to take that opportunity and really grasp onto it. And I think a lot of it has to do with having community meetings like this, bringing in more folks like you to discuss how we can create what we want to be seen as. Because I know when I speak of LA theater, when I'm away from Los Angeles, I have to fight really hard for people to listen to me. And that's become very difficult because everyone wants to go, yeah, but New York, no, guess what? There's some words about New York I could say, but I won't because I'm on film and my children might watch it one day. But I will say this, I believe that there are more LA actors going towards actors in Chicago, which is where I'm from, so I love Chicago. I love it, love it, love it. But more LA actors going and convincing these people that LA is a theater town. Now, what I would love to be able to have is going, what is our mission statement? What is that? What is the one thing that we can all collectively say about Los Angeles theater that people will go, oh, shoot, I didn't know, and be able to like really grasp onto that. I mean, who said that earlier about, oh, I think it was Snell, about our missions and what, you know, there's so many companies, there's so many companies who are just trying to do whatever play they can to get out there. I think we need to start refining that and figuring out, you know, who we are and putting that down for us to be able to have a discussion, to be able to share that. That's my thought. Do you have anything else to say? Okay. I want to hear Lindsay. I yield my time to Lindsay.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting, coming from CTG, sometimes we come from these problems or these challenges from a different side of things because we are one of the larger organizations in town with a lot of resources. And it's a conversation that we have in our offices all the time. You know, what can we do? How can we be more a part of the community? What can we do to help the LA theater ecosystem tell our narrative, you know, create our narrative? There's two things I kind of want to say. I think giving opportunity to LA-based generative artists is incredibly important. And I think, when I say generative artists, I mean that on every level. I mean that from a director or a playwright, and we are living in like the LA renaissance of playwriting right now. I mean, playwrights are flooding LA, and we have such access in a way that we haven't before. It's such an opportunity. But also, I want to talk about companies. You know, that there are companies in LA that our staff goes to see these shows that are so beautifully done, beautifully produced, so artful, and you know, we talk about how can we help highlight or open up our doors to those companies. So generative artists and I think collaboration. I think it's incredibly important on a national level as well as a citywide level. So there's something that, we talk a lot about commissioning playwrights in conjunction with other theater companies nationally and internationally, but we're also talking about how do we create collaborations between these intimate theaters and our theaters, because it's important to us, Center Theater Group, to be able to say, oh, I'm an LA-based artist. I'm a director who came out of LA. I'm a playwright who came out of LA. And even if that person moves to Chicago or New York, they can tell the story of how they came up in the LA theater scene, and that there was opportunity and there was a place for them to hone their skills and their craft. So something that we're talking about continuing doing is giving as much opportunity to theater companies and artists that are LA-based, that are telling stories that are important. We can get better at it. Everyone can, but Block Party maybe was a first step. Or not, I wouldn't say it was a first step, but it was there's many steps, a big step, but something that we're really proud of that went really well. It was sort of a test case last year, and it went so well that we thought, oh, we're committed, and we learned so much from the intimate theaters that we worked with, and created long-lasting relationships. And what's more exciting is that those companies that we brought to be in the room together to have these conversations have now formed relationships with each other and are going on to do co-productions, and they're sharing resources with each other. And that can only strengthen the entire community if we all create opportunities like that.
Thank you. Laura.
I was impressed in the report that there was a discussion about advocacy and the importance of working with Arts for LA. How many people here are members of Arts for LA? Guys, there is an incredibly strong regional arts organization, advocacy organization, that is there to fight for more funding for you from the cities, the municipalities, from the county. Jose Luis was on the advisory committee for the Cultural Equity and Inclusion Initiative that, among other recommendations that have not yet been funded, was doubling the organizational grant program budget. So we need to all get out of our silos and be participatory members of Team Arts LA, not just Team Theater LA, to make sure that we are involved in civic issues in substantive ways and help move them forward. And I think that's something that every person in this room can do. And by the way, signing up for Arts for LA to be a member is free.
Yep. I have two comments and a follow-up question, and then we can turn it over for questions. A comment about the changing narrative. It was not that long ago, well, it was that long ago, 10 to 15 years ago, where shows that would come out of Los Angeles and would open off-Broadway would actually remove their LA credit from the programs because it was considered a strike against, if New York critics perceived that it was born in LA, it must be bad, and they didn't want to be associated with it. That no longer is the case. So there is sign of a shifting narrative. At least we're not held in contempt, which is probably, that's not bad. That's not bad. That's a step up. The other thing, I think it was, Snehal, your comment was, if one of our theaters would just get sued by the federal government, can you imagine what that would do for the relevance of LA theater? Would be remarkable. It would. Yeah, exactly.
All LA.
Yeah, that was. I had a question for Danny, and you. I think you had said you didn't know about the statistics, but you talked about the frequency of theater going. Oh, it was Snell. Excuse me. Good.
I don't know.
The frequency of theater going, and yet you said that the attendance is up, but the frequency is down. Is there? Do you know why that is, or is that a larger cultural issue?
Yes. Sorry. It's a larger field-wide issue in the performing arts that they're finding. So this was specifically that they were finding with opera and dance, that the number of single households reached was larger and greater than ever, but the number of times they were attending was less. And I think that's something I haven't heard too much conversation about in theater, but I think it correlates with a lot of what we're finding, because some of us, in our seasons will have shows that reach higher numbers of folks than ever before, but then subscriptions and other single ticket sales are down.
Yeah.
So I think that's something for us to really investigate and ask questions about, as we talk about engagement.
Yeah, I'm just curious if that's a paradigm shift in the culture. I think it's a really interesting question.
I just think, I mean, it correlates to how many different things pull at our time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was my one question. I did want to give you some time to. We have a panel, a really distinguished panel here, so please feel free to use their expertise. Tony.
Run as fast as possible down aisles. Thank you all for your patience with this process, and I'm going to actually have to hold the mic, so yes.
Okay, good, so I can hold my notes. First of all, thank you all for your leadership. I'm Tony Abetamarco. I'm co-artistic director at Skylight Theater. I've been here since 1978 making theater, and I know how much your dedication has really helped to change it. I really want to thank CTG. I know it sounds like I'm blowing smoke up, you know what, but the fact that you have instituted Block Party means there's verticality within the city, and that has been something that we've been deficient in. There hasn't been enough verticality, a show that starts in this rich, fertile soil of seeds and, you know, new work, doesn't get a chance to move anywhere within the city, and so it just peters out and blows away. Peter Sellers said this years ago. Things bloom and then disappear like the desert. But I want to talk a little bit, or ask a little bit, what your impressions are. First of all, it feels to me like the absence of the press. New York has a 150-year tradition of respected international magazines and newspapers. Even though they're threatened right now, it's still, people read about what's happening in New York. And the promotional stuff that's going out of New York makes me every week go, shit, should I buy a ticket or should I, you know, stay here and keep in the trenches? So I'm just curious, you know, that's one of the things I think that is not helping the narrative. Because the narrative of all this diversity in this city is fantastic, and all the new work in this city is fantastic. But as long as so many of our big theaters, and I won't name names, are bringing in shows from elsewhere, which is great, we get to see them, but they're not giving enough time to what's growing here. Okay, so I'm curious about your stuff with that, verticality. Thanks. I think I said everything. Thank you. Oh, no, one last thing. Laura, I know, I'm pretty sure you were involved. Way back, you mentioned the Olympic Arts Festival in 1984, and I know that wherever that funding was coming from and whoever spearheaded all of that, there was a catalog for all the international shows that were coming into town, and there was a catalog, a very high-gloss catalog, for all the shows that were Los Angeles-based shows. So if this is going to happen again as a citywide festival, we really need to make sure that not just Knee-High or the Cirque du Soleil, not Cirque du Soleil, you know, Ariane Minushkin from Paris, or the international productions get attention, but all the productions that are happening here, it's an essential part of raising the profile. Thank you.
And I'll be right back.
Yeah, please.
Well, I mean, that was because when this meeting happened with the LA critics, that was my big deal. That there has been the intellectual arm of the theater, in a way, were not advocating themselves for the LA theater. We were only good if we were compared to New York or to Chicago or to whatever at the time, and because they were asking why are we so irrelevant, because they never created an identity for us. So you know what I mean? Meaning that was my conversation with the critics 5, 10 years ago, I don't know how long, and I agree with you. But you know, I mean, there was a movement around 5 years ago, and because New York and Chicago, they put a lot of money on the advertisement of their entertainment because of tourism. There was a movement around 10 years ago, remember? Eli Roth actually wanted to put some money into marketing for the arts of LA, but it needed to be matched by the county, and that didn't happen.
I worked on.
Yeah, and that was millions of dollars he was trying to create a prime, you know what I mean? And say, this is the arts in LA, let's do a national and international marketing campaign, that it didn't happen. So I hear you, meaning we've been in that discussion for a long time, and it's unfortunate that it had not happened.
So I just want to add that in 1984, we were in a much different place. And it made sense in 1984 for Bob Fitzpatrick, who was the head of the Olympic Arts Festival, the president of CalArts, to bring in extraordinary companies from around the world. I was fortunate to be asked to develop the concept for the next Cultural Olympiad, and I don't know if it will come to be, but it was included in the bid package. And the concept in 2028 has to be very, very different. It can't be about bringing in from the outside to a mature theater company. And my concept is that theater artists and organizations in LA will be given the opportunity to invite collaborations with artists and organizations from all over the world to create all new work that will premiere here in LA. And that after the festival can go back to the home countries, creating relationships and ripples that will extend for decades. We'll see if that comes to be, but I don't think we should approach things the same way.
Well, I just want to echo about, I think the problem of the press is something that's going to continue as the mass media influence diminishes with, and so I think the other things where there's two big main opportunities right now, field-wide, is embracing of technology and incorporation of technology in what we're doing. So, I mean, I will be the first to admit that Twitter makes me cry, but it's like, how can we integrate and do that to share? And then the other thing is to create a new narrative around risk and risk-taking, right? Because of these other factors of how much it costs, time, all that, people tend to go towards what they know or what has already been established in terms of word of mouth and things like that. And so it's how can we bring folks in to embrace something that is new or unknown and champion that. So I think that's gonna be part of it. I do think we also need to find a better cultural diversity in who our critics are in this city, significantly.
I'm gonna hold it just for you. I'll hold it for you.
Okay, I was asking if I might.
Oh, do you want to? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Just make sure to touch that bottom part. Go ahead.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm an artist, so I like to hold my own microphone. My name is Malik Alameen. I'm artistic director of Griot Theatre. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to say a couple of things. First is to acknowledge and give thanks and gratitude for the role that CTG has been playing. Kind of embracing its role as a leader in the theater community and recognizing that with that leadership comes an obligation to the larger theater community. And I think it's been wonderful in terms of what I've seen in regard to Block Party and other endeavors. I believe in that so much that my annual theater donations go to Griot Theatre and to CTG because I believe in what the organization is doing. So I applaud you. I wanted to pick up on something that Snehal said about money, right? About the artist and their ability to create a livelihood for themselves making art. Because we talk about the quality that is available in this city, but I think we also need to look at some of our most talented artists, whether those are actors, directors, designers, or others, can only sustain themselves for so long with what they're able to make at most of the theaters in Los Angeles. There are only a handful of theaters in Los Angeles that can really pay them what they're worth if they're able to string together jobs throughout a year. So I would also suggest that a challenge for all of us, whether we're larger or smaller, is to consider the pay that we afford our artists to be one of our greatest priorities and our greatest investments in the art that we do. So sometimes that comes down to, am I going to do one show or two shows? Am I going to do 2 shows or 4 shows? Well, if I pay my artists less, I can do more shows. But who can you get for what you're going to be paying? I'm a very small theater, and so I have to think about that and what I do. And I know there are many theaters that are larger than, well, almost every theater is larger than ours right now. But I think as we grow, wherever we are in that spectrum, thinking about our contribution to the economy of artists is critically important, because that will ultimately, over the long run, affect the quality of artists we're able to retain in our ecosystem. That's the second point. Last one is just, I'd also like the panelists to speak about the idea of the artists versus the professionals or the business people. I think some of the larger institutions do a better job of having people who are actually business people, who work on strategy, business plans, look at the money, look at marketing and branding, and then a lot of other organizations that are just in love with making art. We think about the art first, and then we handle whatever business we have time for after that. So I'd just ask you to talk about how the handling of business versus the handling of art either works in your organizations or what you've observed in the LA industry. Thank you for letting me
know. There's two things. One, I want to echo and say what we should also be looking at is the transactional relationship we have with artists these days, so that they're only as good or we only work with them on one-off projects, right, versus sustained long-term relationships. So, you know, I think CTG is the only organization here with artists on the payroll, right, that are you're able to support. And I think budgets are where you show your priorities, but in these day and age, how many of our budgets have space and room for artists to get full salaries or fees, to be in residency for years or a couple of years, to gestate a work, to be there, to feel like it's their home? And so that's often the first thing that's cut. So there is something about, yes, this business side of and having the right folks in to guide that, but then also leaving room to pay for artists and making that the priority at where you are. So I think I've been thinking a lot about the company model, right? And how I think Noise Within does it great in Pasadena in terms of creating a home for a number of artists that are in residency for their time there. So I think those are all kind of big picture things that we have to look at and think about.
Jumping on to Jose Luis's point about the critical community, and particularly critics of color, you might want to look at how critics get paid, and it's even worse than artists. Believe me, and that's why they're not flooding into the field.
I think that arts managers, the business side, are supremely creative. As someone who spent my life doing it and who's helped others do it, there's 3 graduates of Claremont Graduate University's arts management program sitting right here. Raise your hands. Who all help run theaters? And there are fantastic opportunities for artists and arts managers to engage around critical issues, budgets, marketing, development, all that stuff. No one's stopping you, but
yeah, I mean, I think something that this is a national movement, what you're talking about, and the danger of the national movement is, as you know, it's 29 artistic directors across the country who are stepping down. And the boards of directors right now, most of the boards of directors and these big regional theaters are interested in profit, and not profit, but the survival of their theater. So, I mean, some of them will be business people. They're not necessarily directors or artists who are going to become the artistic directors of these theaters. And this is a national movement, and we have to be aware of it, because anything that happens anywhere will affect all of us, even if we're small and tiny. Because you have to understand that that movement is not new. It's been happening for the last 40 years somehow in the American theater, and we're still suffering from those consequences after the Reagan administration. Politics affect us, the president affects us, you know, as theater makers. So it's a really interesting conversation right now nationally that everybody should be engaged, because that is the trend. Because they believe, again, it's the narrative, they believe that artists, that we're not good business people.
you know, I just want to add that the visual arts community has been at the forefront of this issues and is actively trying to train curators with the business and management skills to become leaders of museums because they don't want to see the business people taking over.
Well, I just had a comment on if you could just hold for a sec till the mics.
I'll go there and then Guillermo, you had a question, right? So I'll come back over here. Okay. Coming around.
One of the things that the Getty was interesting about the art world is that it's also transactional. It's about elevating art so that you can sell it at a higher price. And that's what they were trying to do with Latino art here and with this last festival. And so the notion of commodifying the art form. And we haven't discovered a way of how do you commodify the theater form, right, in Los Angeles. And that's one of our big challenges. And I think artists, you know, we are challenged with the notion that if you want to make a career in the theater and use Los Angeles as your base, you cannot only stay in Los Angeles. That the work has to be given value and universality so that you can travel outside of Los Angeles to present your work as well as go global. And we have very few artists who are looking towards that. And that really is the future. To be seen in festivals across the world, but to call Los Angeles your base. This is part of the notion of cultural diplomacy, and we have to be invested in it, as many artists in world-class cities are.
Guillermo?
And then I'll run back. I will hold it for you.
Hi, I'm Guillermo Cienfuegos with Rogue Machine Theater and Pacific Resident Theater. A lot of really exciting things being talked about, and so thank you, CTG, for having this panel happen. Particularly for me is to hear this concept of the creation of a narrative making it a priority, and more than a priority, but a community wide priority for everyone working together with that. But of course, what's been said in not so many words is that it's not just the task of creating an affirmative narrative, it's also simultaneously combating an existing stigma. So I guess I just want to ask all of you how, it's a great idea and a great exciting concept, but how do you think we should go about executing both those tasks simultaneously?
I want to say something here on that. I feel like I've sat on quite a few panels, and I know you guys all have too. And sometimes we can sit in a room and we can talk about the things that we should do. And I often leave and go, well, what are we doing? What are we doing? Like it's one thing, I think we all are in agreement here that we should come together as a community and create a narrative around Los Angeles being a wonderful place to be a theater artist. It's a very complicated thing. I think there's a lot of mythology around each city. If you think about New York and how it was a theater town to begin with. And they have years and years and years of that being a destination for theater. And LA has always been a film town. And you think about Nashville, and you think about, there's cities that have this sort of built in. And so it's a glacial shift. But if we came together and sat in the room and actually put some dollars, because I think any idea that it was worth having needs to have money attached to it, if you're going to see something actually happen, and talk about a sort of branding initiative. I used branding, I used the word. But something that, where we all get together and talk about what the narrative of LA theater and how we can all work together to actually do something about it. Because I think we're all in agreement here. So that is one of my frustrations sometimes with these panels. I also want to address a little bit of this idea of the long-standing way that LA theater has been done, and this is probably a whole other panel, but there has been a big divide between the large theaters and these intimate theaters, and that has a lot to do with equity and contracts and things like that, right? And I do think that there's room to be creative about how theaters grow. How does a theater like yours, that's small, you're saying, and in 10 years from now, where's your theater at? And how does it grow so that it is paying artists, that it is a mid-level theater and paying artists in a way? Like, it just feels like there's such a divide sometimes. And if artists want to live here and make a living here, and call LA their home and have a lot of opportunity, they should be able to go to a tiny theater and do a wonderful project that could get picked up somewhere else. They should be able to then, next they go to a mid-level theater, next they come to CTG, and they go to Chicago or whatever, but there should be a lot of different opportunities at different levels. And how do we solve that problem? That's probably a longer panel.
Can I say something about
Yeah.
that? I'm not, because in 2014, I was invited by a playwright to come and a group of 8 and talk about Latino theater in the country. They just say, what are we doing as Latinos in the United States? And the first thing we found out, which we knew, is I know the theater in Dallas is terrible, and the theater in Denver is awful, and in New York is totally bad. And instead of assumptions, what we did, we called 75 people from different theaters and put us in a room. We don't really know each other. I don't even know if we've seen each other's work. I don't even know how we can create a narrative. We didn't even know who's doing what. The first thing so what we did have a conference, Yes for Latinos in Boston, to talk about what are we doing. And I know she does avant-garde, and you do classics, and he does new plays. I know that, but really, we haven't really invested in each other's narratives. So they're all the type of theater. So, and this was an idea. We would not change the narrative. We wanted to alter the narrative because TCG and the American Theater Magazine has never talked about Latino theater in all those years. Yeah. So that was a big fight that we had with TCG about that. And I can tell, and with the regionals. Last year, out of that, Sud was the Taper, Destiny was at the Goodman, meaning we had 5 plays in major regional theaters as Latinos who had not happened for 20 years. Maybe it was 1 a year that somebody would do. Okay, and not only that, since last year, meaning the Mexican Theater was in the front page of the American Theater Magazine. This year alone, we've been in the front page twice. You know what I mean? Suddenly, we created a movement that Latinos people needed to pay attention to. And I think that's important for us as Latinos. It's not as complicated. It's really willingness, because we had no money or anything, but it's how we as a community get together and talk about, I want to see your work, I want to see your work. I want to know how we can create this narrative, and take those assumptions that, don't go see that, they're no good, which is the rule.
I just want to echo something that what Diane said. I think we also have to be looking at hybrid models or different models, right? So you look at Cornerstone or Sojourn Theater. They don't have a space. They don't have ticket revenue. Their money comes from artistic residencies, from commissions, from selected donors, right? I say this in jest because my board chair is here, but I said our money problems would go away if I could open up a dispensary in the lobby of EastWest Players, right? So why are we not thinking of those European models of how to operate, right? Of a restaurant or, and this is maybe a controversial statement, but I actually think we have a lot of space here. We have a lot of space here in LA, which is a different problem than Chicago and DC and New York. And how can we share and utilize all of that space? Because I didn't know DCA had a space, and LA County, and LA Stage Alliance, and Jose Luis, we have lots and lots of room actually. And it's about how we can find ways to support each other and to share that space. I think that's something that we need to act on sooner rather than later.
Okay, we have a question back here.
Hi, Nathan Birnbaum, producer and playwright. Chair of the LA Stage Alliance. Am I on?
No, you went on.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more about what we're hearing from the panel, and certainly the two things seem to go together. And the narrative, which I also think of as being our self-image as a theater community, goes to get hand in hand with needing. Funding works will work very well. Funding will work more positively for all of us as our self-image and our narrative improves. For example, we have a lot of, and the brand is for us is completely organic when you consider that Celebration and EastWest are incredibly important nationally, and Louise has made LA a center for a national movement in theater. We have a relationship with Pacific Rim, which was exploited in the 1990 LA festival, which is one of the LA festivals we should think about, because that was one which involved a lot of grassroots theater and the smaller theaters and our brand. So I have a funder not too long ago said to me that the pie in Los Angeles is not going to get bigger in terms of funders. Actually, since that person said that several years ago, I've seen the pie get bigger, and I think that the pie, the funding pie in Los Angeles, has to get much, much bigger, actually, and that as we start to think of ourselves as part of a hothouse of creativity, of diversity, and one of the most important theater centers in the world, we will start to help funders get emotionally involved, which is an important aspect of this, in the theater and in the growth of the theater, the new era of the theater that we're opening up. And so just a moment of self-criticism about this, having worked in both large theaters and small ones. In the small theater, we don't often enough set aside enough administrative time and enough funding, seeking enough time to find funders. And if we all in small theaters were able to add 1 or 2 board members who were able to help fund our theater, it takes time to develop that. This would be part of what I think is this increasing pie that has to happen, where we need to have more individual funders, more institutional funders, and hopefully more government funding as well. So I think that's several comments rather than a question, but if anyone wants to respond, that would be great.
I just wanted to point out something about the narrative. One possible source of inspiration might be the Hollywood Fringe Festival, and I say that not to pass any judgment either way on the quality of the work that's being done, but from an audience point of view, and we're not talking much about audiences here, from an audience point of view, to hang out on a Friday night and to go from theater to theater to theater, and you watch this flood of creativity, and you go, oh, this is fertile ground. This is fertile ground, and I think if you could extrapolate that out, that is what Los Angeles is. It's huge fertile ground, and these fringe shows have a relationship to a community, and it doesn't matter actually if it's awful, because then you go to the next one, and the next one might be joyous, or you might take a sliver of something that's joyous, and you go, oh, they're building something. This is something that's in the works. And I'm wondering, for the narrative of LA theater, this is, as a critic, what I've seen for decades, is that it is absolutely fertile soil where stuff is constantly being built. And the question is, when you get somehow the fringe, and I'm pointing to that because they've somehow attracted the city and the county, well, particularly the city, to support it. On many levels, because it draws an audience, and now they have banners, and they have an identity, and if we could extrapolate that region-wide, I think that may be part of the key to the kingdom, and it's nothing to do with Chicago, what happens. It's nothing to do with New York. It's entirely homegrown stuff where people are coming to try out their stuff and seeing a plethora of shows over a weekend is a kind of mini festival, and it can be joyous and it can be exhausting and it can be frustrating, and then there's always a bar around the corner and where you can, I guess, sedate yourself for the next show, and so it goes. But anyway, that's...
Working again. Sorry about that. Hello, Richard. Just hold it up here.
Testing 1, 2. Well, you know, I had to say something. I'm very interested in the validation for the parking, because that's really new. You've got to get fucking parking validation in Culver City. That sucks, man. But I'm confident we'll get that all worked out. Great to be here, to see you, to leave the east side to come out to the west. Following on something you just said, Mr. Morris, is a shout out really for the LA Basin. You see, if South Coast Rep, Getty Villa, LATC, Pasadena, Valley Performing Arts Center, are places in a span of a year that Culture Clash will hit those stages this year, thankfully. And I say that because we're, not to counter, because I absolutely agree with what Diane said earlier, but I also feel this notion of the basin as our workspace and our risk-taking space. And so that at the California's official theater, Pasadena Playhouse, what we might do there with a very searing, hopefully hilarious border piece, are challenge some very, very established notions in doing so. And part of that ricochet is Encuentro in the wintertime or in the fall downtown, where there were Cuban artists and there were artists from Mexico City, and a kind of coming home for a group like Culture Clash, and to see the love story that's going on at LATC. I'm not interested in sitting down with Charles McNulty to get a better review. There's a larger discussion of his fucking measuring stick is not exactly attuned to our work. So, and we can die on the vine waiting for a review from Mr. McNulty, or the theater can actually help us facilitate a kind of conversation. But it's not about us in the show. It's about the excellence, our own standards of excellence of theater, and challenging that. And who are the holders of the golden standard? Is it the critics? Is it the subscribers? Is it the artistic directors? Is it the cultures within regional theaters? Is it the tech culture? You know, so we walk into a space and we're dealing with all these things, but we are interested in not just dropping bombs and moving on. We're interested in also helping to keep the land fertile and tilling the soil and doing our part and moving on for the next groups that are coming. We're rather a homeless group. So this idea of risk-taking, it's a very real thing, and it's a daily thing. And for a playwright, it is a daily thing, and you have to kind of take on that battle a bit and convince folks and collaborate and work with artists. This idea that you guys are saying, if we could get sued or by the feds, it's a little self-congratulatory. There was a young dreamer actor in Sapo at Getty Villa, and her mom was undocumented. So going past the guard gate every night at the Getty Villa so her daughter could do the show was a horrifying proposition for her, because she didn't know if they were the federal or the county, or who are those people in the guard gates that demanded a very strict identification procedure just to go work on the stage, and because that's kind of how the Getty works. And there were some very harrowing nights where the mom just said, "Run, mija, run," and you're not supposed to run at the Getty Villa. It's like a state prison, a wonderful state prison with beautiful statues, but if you run, you can be removed. And they just have these understandings that we all know as artists, but I think for a Mexican family coming with very small children, it's a very difficult navigation proposition for them. And so that idea of identifying and that idea of alien status is a very real thing on some of our stages throughout the night. So that was it, but just to say that the LA Basin as this fertile field for us, because we always are tending to look over the mountain, look over the river, look over the ocean. And so it's been a real pleasure the year engaging with a lot of you folks and a lot of practitioners in this room. The battle and that struggle will continue, and come and see us in June at the Pasadena Playhouse.
I wanted to respond to Mr. Montoya's quite right idea about taking advantage of the whole basin, and build, Lindsay, I thought you brought forward a thread that really needs to be followed up on, which is that we need to create and invent new ways for small theaters to grow into mid-sized theaters that do not follow traditional trajectories. And certainly taking advantage of the basin is one of those. If I was creating a theater right now in LA, I would probably not have my own space. I would book in that whole ring going from Lancaster, Palmdale, Santa Clarita's thinking about building an amphitheater, Valley there's a whole ring, literally, of performing arts and facilities, none of which cannibalize each other in terms of its audience. And yet we don't think of intra-regional touring as part of our solution to help pay artists.
We've got the space, goodness knows. Yeah.
Down over there.
Hi, I'm Allison Bibakoff. I'm an independent director and choreographer, and I had a thought that I wasn't going to bring up because this seemed like a very interesting conversation about much broader long-term issues, but something you just said and something Lindsay said earlier about what specifically can I do when I leave here instigated me to speak. And also I looked at this as sustaining the Los Angeles theater community, right? I find that a lot of those theaters that you mentioned and others don't hire LA people. A lot of mid-sized and larger theaters in LA get funding from the city and then bring people in from New York. I actually worked on a production, I assisted on a production many years ago, where the only major person from the creative team was the sound designer from LA. Everyone else, the wig designer, the costume designer, the director, the set designer, everyone was from New York. And Peter Kuo, did I say his last name correctly? Brought up, he conducted a very interesting study on his own about 2 or so years ago before he went to New York to study, that showed had a chart of these larger and mid-sized theaters and the small amount of LA talents they used. And he made an interesting proposal. I'm pretty sure this came from Peter. Peter, I don't know if you're watching, correct me if I'm wrong, that these companies that get city money there should be some kind of standard of percentage of LA talents that they use. I think that was a great idea that hasn't really gone anywhere. I actually made a few phone calls to see who could I contact about this, and kind of died. I didn't really know where to go with it. If someone could tell me who to call, I'll call them tomorrow. I thought it was a good idea that people should be reminded of.
Any response?
No, I was going to make a broader comment. You had something? My broader comment was, what you're seeing, I think, is a fairly normal trajectory of a place that didn't feel very good about itself and wanted validation from elsewhere, to a place that is now matured to the extent that it can trust its own abilities. And so I think we're going to start to see that change. I hope we're going to start to see that change.
And yes, one of the, like she said, I was part of the
Cultural Equity and Inclusion Initiative.
Cultural Equity and Inclusion Initiative for the county. Okay, we went all over the county, have talks with people and to figure out the artists. And this is what we found out, yeah? And you will find out, or you probably already know. The county has $100 million a year for the arts. It's a lot of money. Which 82 million go to 4 organizations in the county. And the rest of it, the LA County Arts Commission, which is very tiny, will do their own program like the Greek, they have a lot of things in there.
The city, but okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just for the record.
But it was, so $4 million was left out of the county, 100 million to distribute between all of us, which it was almost 400 arts organizations in the LA County. I don't want to take anybody's money away. I don't care if whoever gets the money. My proposal to the county says double it. Give us $200 million so we get the other $100 million, who will create an amazing impact in the county and will make us the most progressive art county. That was Laura's fight. We went through it in a very hard time. There's some possibilities, meaning we made the proposal, she made the proposal, she wrote the thing, we're asking the county. Not for 100, right now 67 million I think is.
For the total, and just to double organizational grant program from 4.5 to 9 million, that's what I referenced earlier. That's Arts for LA's fight now.
So, we are very, as people who work and advocates for the theater in LA, who are in those positions, we're very conscious of what you're saying. And we're trying, I have no power, no position, or no money, but that's my fight, from beginning to end. Yeah, meaning give the money to discount. It's all tax money. I pay taxes. I pay a lot of taxes in this county. So the idea is how can we equity? And believe me, I'm gonna keep fighting until I can. But the important thing is I need all of you to fight, because when I got into the fight really heavy and I left the meeting, I wanted to know what happened after I left, and I called people in that committee and nobody called me back. You know what I mean? And you have to be able to say, yeah, I'm gonna fight it even if I lose all my friends, which is okay, because that doesn't matter. The most important thing is that you fight for the right reason.
Could you just repeat what you said about 80 million, the first 80 million goes to who?
To 4 organizations in the county. 4. And you can find that out in the document. You can go to the LA County and look at it.
It's all in the Cultural Equity and Inclusion Initiative report.
So look for it and prepare yourself and go to the county and say, we need more money. You understand? She doesn't work there anymore. They have billions of dollars budget, and I get it, and it's hard, and it's tough, and it's a big fight, but you deserve it as artists in this county. It's not a lot of money, 100 million for the entire county.
Okay.
I just want to take it actually back to the list of things and something Mr. Montoya said. How many of us are actively creating work for people under 22 in this city is a major question, because it's a young city and we have a lot of artists, but we don't have a lot that's actively seeking to reach out there. For us, we have a piece right now that's going through schools about DACA and Tam Tran, and the number of, as soon as that finishes, the number of hands that go up with questions of, I'm undocumented, what does this mean, it is real and is out there. I also think for a city that is as diverse as ours, if you go in our schools and you ask a student, you can ask anyone at LAUSD K through 12, and you ask them to name an Asian American they've studied, most times you won't see a single hand raised because it's still not there. Or if you ask to name a Latino American, you get maybe one, you maybe get Cesar Chavez. So, it's very few. Those things are not changing, and there's an opportunity for us with our artistry and our artwork and our storytelling to change and upend those narratives. But sometimes we, again, get siloed and lost, and I think that's another one on that list, but how are we accessing and building that next generation of artists, and how are we also reshaping larger structural colonial models and narratives with the work we're creating?
Okay. Question?
Hi. My name is Sue. I'm a new neighbor in the area. And I was just hearing you saying you have the facilities that are here and available. The money is problem number 100, whatever. And, but I'm from back east originally and lived in Manhattan 18 years, but originally from Syracuse, New York. And we had a wonderful university there, and Syracuse University. And I'm just wondering about reaching the students. And in the theater, there's a Newhouse Theater group there, and getting them out here. I know for television, they're all in line, but I'm just wondering about contact the universities. I know you said you go out and about, but I didn't know how far out and about, whether every state. Also, getting those people not only here thinking they can, and working for you at a very minimal amount of money, if any, or also they might stay and become long-term LA actors and actresses. But what about going to the alumni groups all over the country? I don't know if you've done that. Hitting those groups and building up the history here and seeing if we can bring more people, have more and more interest in the LA situation. So.
Well, I can only speak for Celebration. I mean, we do have a lot of contacts with alumni groups, a lot of LGBT groups that book out our theaters for different occasions. In terms of like my travels and talking with universities, those kids that are coming to LA are coming for a very specific reason. They want to have a place to learn, a place to grow, to enhance their craft. And I don't believe, I know that there are some organizations, like I went to Columbia, and there is a Columbia in Los Angeles group of folks, and they get together and they and they do these things, and we support each other. And I know that's here, but if I'm talking to someone who went to Oberlin or Wesleyan or one of those other places, I'm not really involved in those organizations, those alumni organizations. I just go and talk to them. But I know they do come out to support, as well as a lot of like fraternities and sororities. Those organizations are huge supporters of theater. When one of their members come to do a show, they show up by the hundreds. So if you want to get a sold-out house, it has someone from SIGEP or from AKA come in and do a show with you, because those sisters and brothers come to support always. So I think that there should be more alumni support for people who run the theaters in Los Angeles, who work in theaters in Los Angeles, but I don't exactly know what that is.
Alan?
They're all over.
One more, Alan,
Okay,
then
one
we
more.
should probably.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Getting my exercise in. Oh. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh, you did. Oh, sorry. Go this way.
A question,
Just stay up here.
I'm Chris DiCarlo from Santa Monica Playhouse. I grew up in the theater here. I've lived here all my life. I'm third generation. I started acting when I was 3, and Santa Monica Playhouse was my refuge when I got back from Vietnam. And during that time, we've done hundreds of productions and thousands of performances. And one of the things that I'm not hearing, and I really appreciate what you guys are doing, because it needs to be done. We need to have this conversation, and it's never ending, and it's one we all must be engaged in. But I think the thing that I share a lot with my students and with my audiences all the time is that our most precious resource is our humanity. And when we get locked in our bubble and our ambition and our goals and our whatever we're trying to do, whether it's creating a product that's better or more realized or good or professional or whatever, those terms, they bleed down, they filter down to the children. And the children that I work with, and we start with 4 years old all the way through teens and then adults, they develop a fear. They have to be good. They have to be the best. And because we're commodifying our artistic expression, what does that mean? What brings in the most money? What brings in the most audience? What puts the most butts in the seats? And I think we have to remember, we have to support those things. And I hear threads of that in the conversation, but I don't hear it in the conversation because for our funding, we have to prove our professionalism. We have to prove the quality of our work. We have to prove all of those things. But Intimate Theater is an incubator for new work. It's a nurturing place. And a 2-year-old child doesn't know right or wrong. They express themselves. And pure expression is the foundation of what we tell our stories and what we do. And what we're trying to accomplish is to impact people, to connect with them as human beings through the deepest part. It's an intimate interaction. Drama is an intimacy that we don't get in everyday life. We get to engage in things that we would never think or imagine. We get to expose ourselves to things. We step out of our own bubble when we sit in the theater. And we nurture not only the humanity of each other by that community, that common experience, but we also bring, we open ourselves up to new thoughts, new ideas, and we, most importantly, is questions. And good, bad, or indifferent, the theater experience impacts our lives forever. You can all think back to every play you've seen, every person who stood up and gave an oral speech, every person who told a story, and it's there in your memory. And it impacted you, good, bad, or indifferent. It impacted you. It's a story that goes on. We have that. That's what we do. But if we forget the humanity, if we lose the sight of that, and we don't nurture that 2-year-old in all of us because of business and because of this and that, I think we can't lose sight of that in our pursuit. That's all. Thank you.
And I think this.
Thank you. My name is Alan Miller, and I'm an actor, and I have been a director and a producer and a theater manager. My wife and I ran our own theater for 10 years. My early experience as a young person in New York was that most theater was free for high school students, college students. I studied at a place called the Dramatic Workshop where they had an entire theater. They had 3 different theaters. One was only for high school students. Those kids all learned to love theater. It was special. Adults weren't even permitted. Teachers weren't even permitted. It was for the high school students. Kids love that. Kids are nurtured by that this is for them. And I think when you say community, the first thing that comes to my mind is sharing. Community means sharing. It means sharing of resources, of ideas, money, whatever you want to call it. To hear a figure like was just told about $100 million being there, only 4 organizations are entitled to 80% of $80 million of that money is beyond infuriating. It's destructive. Every person in this room should be joining every organization that you can that fights these incredibly held positions by our politicians, by our theater operators, and so on. I don't know how, it seems to me that any theater could, no matter what their circumstances, put aside 15, 10 free tickets a weekend for high school students. If you want to nurture, you got to do something to get the nurturing going on. And I am all for artists being paid. I'm a member of the Screen Actors Guild, and there are over 160,000 members. Of only 15% are ever working at any given time in TV and film. So when you're talking about making a living in theater, it's a dream world. It's, you know, all my earnings came out of doing theater, which led me to TV and film. And I've always been very deeply indebted to all the theater experience that I was able to have in this town, that equity is now suffocating. I don't understand why every small theater organization in this town isn't fighting equity tooth and nail, because they are closing more opportunities for people to start and grow. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the current status, but equity permits, except for membership organizations, only showcases. 50 seats are under 4 weekends, and that's it. So what kind of art are you nurturing in these circumstances? I'm saying there's so many issues that have been brought up. I'm full of so many ideas of messages being sent out and so on, but every one of us individually must look around, think around, talk to other people, share whatever resources you can, and join every organization, like has been mentioned here already, to help fight the politicians and the thinkers in this town who control our industry, our art, our hopes for the future.
Thank you. I think when we talk about our theater, and the word they use is transactional, we might want to be careful of that, because it's, as the implication of what you're saying is, it's a double-edged sword when everything is about money, and the cultural issue is the distribution of that money, and it's affecting our theater as it's affecting our culture.
But how great that one of your strategies is around affordable tickets for teens.
Yes, exactly, and that's what it's for. I do want to thank Patricia and CTG for hosting this. Thank you to our wonderful panelists and thanks to you for being here. Please, if you want to know more about specifically the phase 2 of Sustaining Los Angeles Theater, which is, to reiterate, is a funded way forward to develop these 4 proposals, and you want to be part of that, we welcome you to do so. The funding will come through NSI. There's a simple place, the dates in your document here are not accurate, so as of, we'll say, Friday, you can go to thisstage.la, and you will find the white paper there with all the accurate information, and I encourage you to please participate. Join us for the meetups at LA Stage Alliance, and please be part of this program.
All right, we'll see you downstairs for our kickoff. Thank you so much for being here.
Thisstage.la.